depending on where you are tuned into this webinar. Welcome to the webinar, Unlocking the Future of Short-Term Energy Efficiency Measures for 2030 and Beyond, co-hosted by Maersk Mc-Kinney-Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping and the Royal Institution of Naval Architects. Let's give ourselves a minute to get the proceedings started for the webinar. I'm Utkarsh, your host for today, and joining here from Copenhagen at the center. Good. It's a minute over 12 here in Copenhagen. Let's get rolling. In the program that I have been working here at the center, Reduce Fleet Energy Demand, we have been working on the drivers that can accelerate the adoption of energy efficiency measures in the industry. One of the drivers happens to be regulation. And long ago, we talked about hosting a sort of session where we can share the knowledge that we have been producing on the topic, the insights that we have gathered on this topic, and share it widely with the broader industry ecosystem. And we also, in the process, wanted to have stakeholders' perspective to refine our take on the problem statement that we are trying to solve for. That, among many other things that we have done over the past, led to the culmination of this webinar that we are hosting today. When we first talked about the design for such a webinar, we pondered a lot on how it should be, but we soon agreed that it should be a conversation together with industry experts. It should be a conversation that is naturally flowing and very well informed based on a deep technical and analytical insights, while also informed by what is happening around us and what has happened in the past. We hope that people who have joined in today for this webinar have something new as an information or an insight or a perspective to take from the session today. Before diving into the actual content and getting the conversation started, I would like to touch upon some practical details. The session is recorded and will be made available on RENA's YouTube channel after the webinar. During the webinar, mic and video remains off for all attending participants. However, the chat box remains open. We have a support team both in London and in Copenhagen who can help you through your questions or practical challenges if you may face. The content-related questions that you may have for the panelists today are to be asked through Slido. I will share more details as we progress in our presentation. There are 3 parts to this session. First, we'll start with some context setting as to why we are having this focused approach on short-term energy efficiency measures. Part 2 is we will engage in a conversation with the panelists who you see on the big screen joining us from London. And then we will spend last 5 minutes to close the session based on how has the conversation unfolded in the 40 minutes that we have with them. To get started, let's look at where we are coming from and why do we say that energy efficiency is paramount to deliver on the International Maritime Organization's ambition towards 2030. Well, what we see here is the black line of the historical greenhouse gas emissions from the maritime industry. We see the gray solid line that in the current business as usual scenario, if things were not to improve and remains as what we have today and what we have seen in the last 5 years, then under those assumptions, the trajectory will follow that path. And the blue solid line and the dotted solid line represents the IMO ambition for greenhouse gas emissions reduction towards 2030 in the striving for and the normal scenario. Now, if we focus in on what has happened in the past, then what we see is between 2008 and 2018, the transport work efficiency improved by 20 to 30%. During the same time, seaborne trade increased by 35%. And it is very important to state and underline that during this period, while the seaborne trade was increasing, and if energy efficiency had not come into play and transport work efficiency had not improved, then emissions would have not plateaued. Emissions would have also risen. So this goes on to say that for one reason or the other, energy efficiency adoption remains important for the ambition that we have with respect to decarbonization, both towards 2030 and also beyond. If we then look at the regulatory landscape that ties the energy efficiency pieces together, like the other basket of measures, we also have a basket of short-term measures that have its own strengths and improvement opportunities, which could allow us to repurpose its intent as we follow the trajectory on the decarbonization journey. We created this overview back in 2022 when we published our maritime decarbonization strategy, and we took a stock at what are these different regulations. Well, with EEDI being the first one, which came into existence, we have this basket that extends both the new building ships, but also all ships. I'm not going to dive into the details that you see here on the page, but it is important to note that there are certain strengths that can be preserved, can be leveraged, as we continue this dialogue on repurposing the intent of short-term measures in the long run. Quite often, we find ourselves in the place where whenever short-term measures review process has been talked about, people tend to talk about CII and SEM. Well, that is for two reasons. One, both EEDI and EEXI are one-off certifications. And EEDI, while being part of the broader bucket of short-term measures, is applicable to new building ships. Secondly, CII, which came into effect only recently, is an annual evaluation that is targeted towards improving the operational energy efficiency for the industry. And SEM is also something that is done at an annual level. So the focus for today's conversation as we progress and talk to our panelists is about CII and SEM and what has happened as part of the broader short-term measures review process, which is then targeted towards the carbon intensity indicator, namely CII, and the Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan, SEM. Well, since CII came into effect on 1st of January 2023, there has been a lot of things that have happened. And if we then zoom in on the last 6 months, there have been a lot of traction, a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion, a lot of debate that has happened on CII, its current design, its enforcement, and what have you. If we then look at what happened since October last year, there were a lot of submissions that were made towards MEPC 82. We were also fortunate to have some of our work represented through RENA, who is a knowledge partner to the center. And MEPC 82 concluded in having a correspondence group focused on looking at the challenges that surround the CII discussion. There were 21 challenges that were identified, and a very focused process followed from start of November to mid end of January. That correspondence group outcome then resulted in some things that will be taken for decision at upcoming MEPC 83 in first week of April. Some things that are left to be dwelled a bit deeper upon in phase 2 that will come after MEPC 83. And then there were matters of abeyance, matters that were left in abeyance, and topics that the correspondence group recommended should not be continued. We will zoom in, and one of the purposes of having this session today is to kind of get more nuances onto the visibility that we have seen since the correspondence group concluded with its outcomes. What remains as key elements of our interest is the metric change that has been discussed and debated, and the whole enforcement via the repurposing of ship energy efficiency management plan. Before we turn our attention to the panelists that we have gathered today for steering this conversation, I have a question for the ones who are attending this webinar today. You could use the QR code that appears on your screen to look at the questions and respond to it. And in the same process, you could, that was quick. In the same process, you could upvote the questions at a later stage when we get the conversation going forward. For each of the questions, we have around 40 seconds before we move on to the next one. Some interesting splits coming up over there. Can we move on to the next question, please? The second question is, what specific factor made you choose your answer earlier? We have just about 45 seconds. Interesting. Well, this is good food for thought for the panelists to get the conversation started. Can we go back to the presentation, please? Thank you. Well, with the question and the answers to the questions setting the tone for the conversation that is about to come, let me invite and introduce the expert panel that we have gathered in the room today with us. We have Kohei Iwaki-san, who is the chair for the Air Pollution and Energy Efficiency Working Group here at the International Maritime Organization. Kohei Iwaki-san is an alternate permanent representative of Japan to IMO and first secretary for the Embassy of Japan in the UK. After joining the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism of Japan in 2009, he has taken part in various fields of transportation policy, including safety of road transport, promotion of green shipping, and international cooperation. During 2017 to 2021, he served for Japanese delegation to IMO MEPC, responsible for the topics on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, air pollution prevention, and energy efficiency improvement, as well as the correspondence group coordinator established by MEPC then. Since 2022, he has been serving for the chair of the working group of air pollution and energy efficiency established under IMO MEPC. Welcome, Kohei Iwaki-san.
Thank you very much.
Then we have Edwin Tang, who I have known in the capacity since I started working here at the center. Edwin is a naval architect who worked in ship design and consulting over 20 years. And he describes that he accidentally stumbled into the world of greenhouse gas regulatory policy development while calculating the attained EEDI of some RoRo vessels. Well, fun stories. Welcome to you, Edwin, and happy to have you on board.
Thank you.
Then, last but not the least, we have Daniel, who is a naval architect and my colleague working here at the center in the capacity of head of regulatory affairs, where he leads a team of industry experts who are working together with policymakers in developing regulations targeted towards the decarbonization of the maritime industry. The team's main focus areas that he leads are within EU and IMO regulations, spanning across the value chain. And Daniel has been working in the maritime industry for over 15 years now, where he has spent time in different classification society before joining the center. Welcome on board, Daniel.
Thank you.
Well, I will pass on the word to you, Daniel, to get the conversation started. You saw the responses to the question, the first question around what did the companies do since CII came into effect on 1st of January 2023, and why did they do that? Maybe that is a good segue for you and Iwaki-san and Edwin to get going. Over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Utkarsh. Thank you everybody for joining. We are joining here from London in the headquarters of RINA in a sunny London. So it's a pleasure to be here with Kohei and Edwin. I will start, with some questions, and the intention is to be like flowing naturally the discussion. We'll see where the discussion goes. I understand that there is also the possibility for more question topics to be brought through Slido. But I'll start with you, Kohei. I think you saw the outcome what Utkarsh presented in terms of what has happened, and he tried to do very quick and brief overview, of course, of how we see things. But you are very in the core of the discussion, so maybe you can provide your own perspectives of what has happened since MEPC 82, or if you can extend it even before if you want, and what are the outcomes of the correspondence group, and then what do you expect to happen in London. What I want to say before I pass on is that I think it has been an impressive work by the coordinators of the correspondence group, because the amount of work done was really impressive. So yeah, if you can share a few ideas, a few thoughts from your side.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks, Utkarsh, for introducing me. And it's my pleasure to be part of the panel here today. So we wish to let me start by thanking Marks Makinimura Center and RINA for organizing this event and inviting me as a panel. So, well, as Utkarsh just introduced me, I have been part of the Japanese delegation to MEPC since 2017 and started serving for the chair of the working group from 3 years ago. It's been 3 years. So, so then I have been serving for the coordinator of the correspondence group too. So it means that I'm working with more than maybe nearly 100 member states and more than, I don't know, 20 or 30 non-governmental organizations. So today I will not advocate Japan's position, of course, but I wish to contribute to the discussion today in light of my experience in working together with those divergent stakeholders in this very important issue. So on your question, yes, I have been coordinating the correspondence group together with just a kind of as a part of the joint coordinator, namely Brazil, Japan, and the European Commission. We worked very closely with them. So because I'm just a part of the joint coordinator, I'm not representing all the coordinator, but I think I can say that, thanks for your kind words, coordinator completed in a very constructive manner, not only the coordinator, but also all the members joining the correspondence group. And for the sake of the correspondence group, I think the group completed its tasks. It was commissioned from the MEPC 82. And you will see a number of reports from the correspondence group in MEPC 83. I think in total, it may be more than 50 pages long, together with more than 500 pages long of the info document compiling the input. So in MEPC 82, as just introduced, we identified 21 common challenges and gaps which should be further considered in reviewing the short-term GHG measure, particularly carbon intensity indicator in CII. I would say that throughout the discussion during the MEPC 82 or in the correspondence group, the views on some topics were quite divergent, whereas some topics were quite convergent. For example, on specific point, as you know, the CII reduction rate from 2027 to 2030 is empty. All the member states express that this should be addressed. So there is a common view that we need to make a clear definition on the reduction factor or Z factor for CII up to 2030. On divergent part, because of the nature of this shipping industry, consisting of a very diverse segments, countries, and whether they are from the regulator's perspective or verifier's perspective or shipping perspective, I will say that there are still a number of divergent views. So the task we have to focus at MEPC 83, is to identify those divergent views and make a most feasible way forward. And in doing so, I think there are two key points. One is that you must, of course, respect the all member states' view, particularly those who have different view from yourself. That is, of course, a common way to make a progress in IMO. And what I expect is that I expect that our working group or MEPC 83 will work as efficient as possible, as efficiently as possible. We are the energy efficiency working group. In order to make efficient discussion, maybe key point is that we should not repeat the same discussion, or we should not advocate our position. For example, if I were a Japanese delegation, I won't advocate the same statement like 10 or 20 times. Rather, by understanding other members' views and always respecting the statements which were already delivered, try to find a constructive solution. That's what I know has been doing, and I have been doing, and I'm expecting for our work at MEPC 83 and coming working group. But quite general, but that's my initial response.
No, but that's I understand your point that also it's a nice introduction to show how IMO works by hearing divergent point of views, and then by doing that, you need to know how we can go towards each other so that we can get to a consensus in the end to solve these solutions, of course. As a follow-up to you, Edwin, I think COHAVE is a very neutral, which is important to respect. But you, as also participant in the correspondence group, and we have been working together, what can you tell about how the correspondence group has been, and what do you think are the key things that you expect to see, the key points of discussion in MEPC 83 and for the future as well?
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you, Utkarsh, for the introduction. So yeah, so this 21 challenges that Kohei talked about really came from approximately 70 odd submissions to the IMO over a number of years, and was an attempt to try and sort of categorize the range of issues that we need to address as part of this CII review. And in these series of 21 challenges, some are very minor issues that are causing problems to certain segments. Others are more overarching issues. So Kohei mentioned the reduction rates for 27 to 30, some more overarching issues around data accessibility of the DCS, some issues around how will these short-term measures, or the CII particularly, connect with the midterm measures, so that we have a coherent whole. Then we had some very probably more overarching issues that affect all ships. So one is this persistent issue of waiting time, or idle time, or time when the vessel is not moving. And then there was something, a lot of, maybe a few issues around the enforcement, and how do you drive energy efficiency improvements on almost ship-specific level. And so we end up with those were the starting challenges, and what the correspondence group process has probably done so far is to help us to further prioritize, because we can't do all 21 challenges. What we can do is try and identify the challenges and the solutions for certain challenges that can solve many challenges at the same time. So efficiency is the name of the game, as Kohei said. So I think what this process is kind of has shown us is some of the challenges we think actually we don't have enough information, or we don't have a clear solution, we can wait, and some we have more developed solutions which we need to explore. And I think,
if I may,
go for it.
Because I like to go to the solution side.
Solutions.
Yeah. So what is one key element that you can see a clear solution shaping up, or at least you think is a good solution?
Broadly speaking, there are two overarching solutions. So one is what we call a metric change, is to change the CII from the current situation where you take all fuel consumption and all emissions for the entire voyage into what we call a voyage propulsion metric, meaning we only look at the fuel consumption from propulsion, and only during that part of the voyage where the ship is operating fairly consistently. So generally we call this during sea passage, so between start of sea passage and end of sea passage, so that all the bits outside of that, whether you have a pilot, you have tugs, you're maneuvering, you're at berth, we take that out, because what we see is that all those operational modes have a less than ideal relationship between fuel consumption and distance traveled. And it's not entirely within your control. Some of it is geography related. So you have a very, very long pilotage, and other places you have a very short pilotage or none at all. This is a part which you shouldn't really be trying to compare shipping with. And the other part that we see in many of the challenges is the influence of non-propulsion fuel consumption. So the fuel you need to use for your hotel load, to maintain cargo, to discharge cargo. That again is very, and that's actually one of the reasons why we have existing correction factors in the G5 guidelines. So a metric change that solves quite a lot of these issues is one strand, but the other strand is the SEMP. Now, people talk a lot about the CII, but in reality, it is the SEMP that we use to implement the CII. So the SEMP there are three parts to it. There's the Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan, and part 3 of the SEMP is where you calculate and you plan, you calculate what your required CII is, and you set out a 3-year implementation plan of how you would intend to reach that target and how you want to keep meeting that target. At the moment, the SEMP is it was developed at quite high speed through the pandemic, and there's some things where we think we can change or improve or adjust so that the SEMP helps to be the SEMP becomes the how we enforce the CII properly. Because today, as many of you know, CII is not really enforced in a very hard manner. It's soft enforcement, so it's kind of a softly approach. If you are rated E, then you need to complete a plan of submit a plan of corrective actions that explains how you're going to get back to the required CII. But there's no port state control. There's nobody that comes and says, no, why haven't you done this and why haven't you done that? So we think the SEMP is the way to start bringing in elements of enforcement, but also to change it so that it's focused on continuous improvement and it can be ship specific.
Yeah, I see. I mean, you talked about enforcement, and I remember that in the word, I saw that word appearing at some point. I think, I mean, I just overwhelmed. There's a lot of things that could be done. There's a lot of leads in a way. The metric change, the SEMP.
Of how much time we're going to need and what we're going to do at each MEPC session towards changing the CII.
Yeah, but that's thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to have ask a question to you, Corey. Like, there's a lot of things, and then we are NPC 83. Soon is going to be 2030. A lot of things are at play. We might go metric change, more correction factors, a SEMP, and as I said, guidelines, MARPOL amendments with their difference and maybe not understandable by all of them. But and then we have the targets for 2030. So how do you see us getting to meeting the targets in 2030 and energy efficiency playing a role? Maybe we can also talk about a work plan ahead, something like that.
We are thankful for that, and of course, it's very interesting and encouraging to hear specific concrete idea from Edwin to further improve the CII. Where I have to firstly say that CII itself is actually living regulation, and it is working now. So whether the current CII can bring the shipping industry to reach 40% target by 2030, well, together with there could be room for further improvement, but basically, in principle, together with a clear direction, including the reduction factor and clear regulatory framework backed with other technical package of the measures, including ED and EXI. The original intention of introducing the package of short-term measure is to achieve the 40% target. Then the issue is that whether and how much we can improve that to further make our certainty toward achieving the target, or the target in 2030 is at least. So if we can be more ambitious, we can aim for more. But anyway, and then on specific idea to metric change or improvement of the SEMP, I'm very encouraged to hear that. And from the for the sake of neutrality, I also have to say that, to be honest, the views expressed in MEPC and correspondence group on metric change or SEMP were divergent. Of course, many members expressed openness to consider, but it doesn't mean they are agreeing on changing metric like that or like that. Even those members who say that metric should be changed, their idea on how it should be changed is different. Or there are many members that they cannot even say yes or no because they need more data to consider. So we have to consider that. I think Edwin also somewhat addressed that point, because he suggested the need to establish a kind of a timeline when we have to do what should be done by when, then. So if those kind of a stepwise approach could help those members who need more data, that will be encouraging. But so it's difficult to say that whether or by when the metric change will be agreed. But in any case, as long as, in any case, if you wish any new idea to be agreed at the IMO, it should be fair enough fair for all the members, not only for this specific segment, but also for all the segment. Fair means that fair doesn't mean that it is favorable for anyone. If anyone thinks that for my segment, this metric is better, for his segment, this metric is fair, then it may not be easy to have a common solution. So fair means that this is fairly implementable and fairly evaluated. And of course, importantly, this should be enforceable. If you introduce, for example, super complicated metric like EDI, well, EDI is very simple, but super complicated one that only a limited person can fully understand, and only a limited person can fully trace how that number comes from, then it may be difficult to enforce in a global manner. Some of the superior people in some segment can be able to do so, but any IMO measure have to be implemented uniformly. And may I continue?
Yeah.
Or you wanna?
You can last point.
Sure.
I think Utkarsh wants to come with a question, but maybe Kohei can finish and then you can come in, Utkarsh.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I will continue 1 minute. Okay. And also for the sake of neutrality, because I see my colleague here who is willing to contribute to change the metric, I also have to, I think that it's also worth noting the views not in favor of metric change. One of the original intention of introducing CII in 2021 was to capture the actual operational performance of ships, not manipulated or calculated under certain ideal or hypothetical conditions like EDI or EXI. At that time, I, as a Japanese delegation, was a proponent of a technical measure, EDI or EXI, believing that this kind of technical measure will allow to remove all uncontrollable factors, but purely evaluate the performance, ship performance. However, of course, there were discussions that only the technical measure will not be sufficient because they need to capture entire emission in the real world. So if the metric change, the current CII metric is very simple. Simply divide all the emission by simple distance by deadweight tonnage. Of course, it contains many uncontrollable factors, but in one side, it can meet some desire to fully capture the real operation and real emission. So if we are to change the, you wish to change the metric, maybe it is also important to take note of those views who are objecting to metric change and maintaining the current status of CII. Sorry, I will stop here.
No, thank you so much. And I think you want to take some questions that are coming from there, from Slido. Utkarsh, you want to pick one or?
Yeah, first for the participants, you can come in and post your questions using the QR code that you see on the screen. And you can also upvote the questions using the thumbs up button that you see on the right-hand side top corner. Maybe you can pick the one that stands the first, Daniel, about the combined efficiency from sea and port, given the reporting gaps in the IMO DCS data.
Yeah. I think this is related to this fleet and metric change. You can relate to that.
So there's a few aspects to your question, but I think reporting gaps in IMO DCS data will be resolved because, as you may be aware, that we approved at MEPC 81, or I think was it? Yeah, we adopted the changes to the DCS for increased granularity. So then it's from next year. We will be reporting a split of fuel consumption, both for what we call the not underway part, which is the port bit, and then the total emissions. So we can derive them from the DCS, what was due to the ports or not underway bit, and then the emissions at sea. So the reporting gap that you refer to probably will disappear once that starts. Regarding combining efficiency for analysis of the correction factors, I'm not entirely clear what you're referring to. However, if you have two separate metrics, one at sea and one at port, the size of these metrics and the relative influence of these metrics can be quite different. And so then trying to combine them can actually be quite complex, or rather drive the CIA indicator in a way that you don't expect. So combining, if that's what you mean, combining two separate metrics, and one being a metric we haven't actually quite invented yet, that's probably not the first step. We could do it for analysis, and the center has done a huge amount of analysis looking at the different behavior of the emissions under different types of CII metrics. But yeah, combining them is probably not the way to go. Recombining them.
Yeah, I see this is somewhat related to also the part fair amount of time in port, the question below, and how can we put pressure on ports to improve their operations and reduce waiting times. I think this is as if I would give my perspective, this is a rather challenging question in a way. I think it's important that we have been working that if you go for a metric change, and even if you go for correction factors, that aim at excluding parts of the emissions or part of the operations modes of the ship, we need to think of ways to still regulate those emissions or regulate drivers that can drive emissions up. For instance, the waiting time is one. How specifically we could do that is an answer that I think it would be relevant for people to bring more of these insights on how we can actually think outside the CII framework, or to think of ways of we can promote the more efficiency of the reports. I don't know if you have thoughts.
Yeah, can I say something maybe potentially controversial? But I think thus far there's been a line of thinking that if we have the CII and we somehow make it sort of somehow ambitious, then there is a hope, and I think it's no more than a hope, that the ports would then somehow contribute. But it is a hope. There's no real levers within the CII to force a port to do something. And so really, if we want to get the ports to be part of this discussion, it almost feels like we need something very targeted towards the ports to get them to work together to do this. But the idea of saying, oh, let's have a really, really ambitious CII in the hope that ports all around the world are going to fall in line and suddenly, make improvements, I think that's just not realistic.
Okay. Interesting feedback, interesting point of view, because there are also diverging views in the IMO, as just to bring back a Kohei, that you think that if you keep it holistically, all emissions, then you can actually have the lever to provide incentives. I see a question that is related to something that I wanted to ask mostly to Kohei. I think is maybe the second question, although I would phrase the question a little bit differently in terms of we have the midterm measures and we have the short-term measures. They're both important. Yeah. They are both being developed at the same time. Any hints into the proposals that are being put forward, suggestions by member states how to address both at the same time, or wait for one and then think about the other? Are we looking long term? What do you look? I mean, maybe some, if we can shed some light on that.
Well, yes, of course, the discussion, the agreement on midterm measure is now ongoing, and hopefully will be approved in this April, then adopted in this October. So, of course, now we cannot prejudge the outcome of the midterm measure, but we expect that something's coming soon. Now, there will be 2 points. Firstly, regardless of midterm measure, this is in my personal view, but the importance of the short-term measure will remain quite prominent, because the midterm measure will drive shipping industry to more the net zero by or around 2050. That's the aim. But in order to achieve shipping to be so, of course, we have to minimize the fuel consumption. Recalling the questionnaire in the beginning, maybe question number 2, the keyword was cost.
Yes.
Cost. I fully understand, and regulation, but I fully understand the economic element will be one of the biggest driver. And I don't jump into the detail of the discussion on midterm measure, but there are, of course, many concerns expressed by many stakeholders Okay. Should I go back?
No, just to turn to you.
Okay,
We
yeah.
lost connection
Okay, sure,
for a while.
sure.
Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, so on the, of course, I don't jump into the midterm measure, but I have to acknowledge that in midterm measure or our pathway toward 2050 net zero, there are significant concern on the cost.
Yeah.
Then that cost is basically uncontrollable from shipping sector because we cannot control the fuel price in general, in principle. But efficiency can be manageable from shipping side. So
that's a really nice way to put it.
In order for shipping industry to as less dependent to the fuel supply sector as possible, I think continuous effort to maximize the energy efficiency is one of the very important contributions that shipping sector can and have to do. That's my perspective.
I think it's a really nice perspective because it provides a long-term visibility to the short-term measures, right? Because it's not short-term in terms of immediate effects that we are seeking here and now. It's short-term that we need to develop them in the shorter term, but these are effects that will last in the long term. I think we did some calculation a few years ago in the center where we calculated 1-to-10 ratio that we invest $1 into energy efficiency board means $10 less of investment in fuel production overall. So it has a overall very nice effect. Utkarsh, you want to come in and suggest?
No, except that it is a very interesting perspective that Iwagi-san mentioned about something that is in control of the shipping industry to focus on, and something that is not in the control of the industry fully, and why it still matters. So it's a very interesting perspective in response to that.
I would like to. I see that we have a few minutes to go in terms of concluding, and I'd like to ask one quick question because we are looking in the center. We are looking post 2030, of course, and that's why intentionally we put in the title of this session 2030 and beyond. And you already alluded to some hints in terms of midterm measures will drive net zero, but then you need to lower the costs. Edwin, what are your thoughts about the need of energy efficiency regulation beyond 2030? Any clever ideas or comments?
At the RENA CII conference a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, one of the things that came out is for a lot of energy efficiency initiatives is the need for crew to be trained to maximize the potential of a lot of energy efficiency, both initiatives and energy efficiency technologies. And currently in the STCW, there's no competence training requirement for energy efficiency. And I think there is in the industry, there feels, we have the CII that here's a number, go meet it. But we haven't quite, I think, provided enough tools for the crew to drive efficiency. We're talking about crew training and a culture and really capacity building. And actually going beyond from now and even beyond into 2030, the SEMP is actually quite a good way of potentially driving this, because actually in the SEMP, in the original SEMP Part 1, there was always a requirement for what training do you need. It is listed in SEMP Part 1 in the guidelines. And to embed this, so the best, and the Secretariat had a paper, an INF paper on SEMP, I think to 82, where they said 50% of the crew that they interviewed from the World Maritime University did this work. 50% of crew did not have any training on energy efficiency. And if we want to drive energy efficiency in the short term and even beyond into 2030, that's, I think, a crucial bit that we need to build. And because if you train crew come ashore, you have the superintendents, you have that feeds into the regulatory system. We need to build that entire kind of ecosystem of people who understand what energy efficiency is, which we're lacking at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a key foundation, really, that we don't have, and we need to build. We should have started building this 10 years ago, but okay, better late than never. And I think that's what I see certainly into the 2030s.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts post 2030 from your?
Well,
I remember in the same RENA conference you mentioned chapter 4 MARPOL, which is very like geeky in a way of addressing regulation. But if you have,
well, one of the elements that one of the factors that I wanted to mention beyond 2030 is exactly what I mentioned previously. But in addition to that, I wish to remind you that our beyond 2030 target is emission from entire international shipping. So this could be a little bit linked with our previous discussion, but our previous discussion that today. But even in a long term, even for example, if you recall the discussion on port, of course, the port operation is maybe out of the control. But anyway, emission to be generated during the port or idling is also part of the emission that shipping have to address. So, of course, maximizing the energy efficiency during the propulsion, that is very important. We have to focus on. But at the same time, even if you think this is out of control, this cannot be addressed by myself, instead of simply ignoring those what we call uncontrollable factors, I think in a longer term, we could have more broader eyes on that aspect to seek what else can shipping do to address all those emissions, because that's our long-term commitment. So again, general, I don't have specific answer, but I wish to keep eyes on that.
Yes, I think that my perspective into this is that in a way, the whole establishment or introduction of the CII regulation and the revision of the SAMP and the EXI has been positive in the way. Of course, we have a lot of issues with the CII, but at least by finding out of those issues and trying to find out solutions for those issues, we are actually today talking about them, right? So we have a better understanding of what drives what. Now we talked about the crew, we have talked about digitalization. In the center itself, we started to talk about how structure of the company sometimes plays a role in ensuring energy efficiency. For instance, someone responsible by the retrofit is maybe not of a certain Muse duct or propeller for the ship. He's not the one who will be responsible by the operation. So there's this lack of connection. They weren't collecting the data, they weren't reporting the data. So I think the CII started to create those conversations in many aspects. So I think in a way, that's the positive thing, that we can brainstorm together of more long-term solutions, understanding the different drivers for energy efficiency. I know that we have 3 more minutes, and I'll leave 5 minutes for the concluding remarks, but maybe any concluding topics from...
If I may.
Yeah, please, Utkarsh.
Then I would like the panel to address the first question that we see on our screens.
Yes. Is it possible that the unfair CII metric will also result in unfair levying meter measures, e.g. weather losses, port uncontrollable factors? It's a difficult question to answer. I think there's no causality between them. I think that at least we can foresee what type of discussions may be coming on the meter measures, because it may be a repeat of the discussion that happened in the CII. At the same time, as we're talking in MTMs about levers in terms of costs, direct costs, that actually may give an extra incentive for those dialogues around weather losses or port fuel consumption, or waiting time to gain a little bit more momentum around the discussion. I don't know if you want to provide a...
I think we don't currently use the CII metric in the mid, unless somehow we decide that, and this is extraordinarily unlikely, unless we decide to use the CII metric as a basis for something within the MTM measures, then there is no the fact that we haven't quite fixed or sorted out the CII metric has no real impact on the midterm measures. But the underlying issue, of course, bad weather, long time in port, which is with absolute emissions, well, that's still an issue but that's nothing to do with the CII.
Yeah, true.
I guess the intention of the question is that apart from the metric, anyway, whether the midterm measure will impose some financial burden to emissions outside the control, like in idling or in port or in weather. And I don't jump into the midterm measure. This is difficult to answer, but again, in the midterm measure, basically our principle is that to address all the emissions from the shipping. So that is something we have to bear in mind. Simply ignoring, or there could be another way forward, but simply ignoring some part of the emission might face some challenge from other members' views.
Good. Thank you,
There are-
Utkarsh. I'm in your hands now for the last 5 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for a very interesting conversation. There are many other questions that we have not come to, and we have received, and there is a request if panelists could respond to them. So maybe we have a task in this group to sit down and then respond to them wherever it is possible and wherever we have the names. But thank you for a good discussion. I would like to put you guys on spot with just one last thing, that what is the one thing that you want our audience to take away with on short-term measures review, both that is going to happen in a few weeks now, but also over the next 18 to 24 months time. I can start with you, Edwin.
The one thing to take away from this, I think we need to work together to find a small solution set that will deal with the issues of CII. At the moment, that as we spoke earlier, there are many different views on and proposals on how we're going to solve it. There's just way too many, and we need to kind of come together and converge. So convergence is very important. And the other thing is that we need to test what we think are solutions today. We need to test very carefully. We didn't do that with the CII, and I think the lesson from that is that what looks like a good solution from the outset really needs to be tested until we're absolutely sure that it is a good solution.
Yeah. Sorry,
that was two.
Okay, thanks. Very difficult question, but difficult to answer. But if I take only one, sorry, quite similar to Edwin's answer, but please talk with your opponent. Your best may not be your opponent's best, and we have to bring one solution. So please talk with the others that you don't like your view. That's only one. But, yeah.
And my one is that I think the more I discuss around these, more I see that the discussion is not around solutions for now, is solutions for the long term. And I think that's where we should be putting our focus, like fixing things for the CII, of course, for the sake of the long-term perspective of the energy efficiency regulation. So looking forward, it's the plan. I'm looking for a solid and robust plan for the review of the short-term measures, and I hope that that's the one outcome that we can get on the MEPC 83. Personally,
thank you. If I were to summarize the last, say, 40 odd minutes of the good conversation among the three of you, while also answering the questions that audience have posed, I think my takeaways are that the process that was there set up during the correspondence group after MEPC 82 has shown that it is possible to do things in a short span of time in a constructive way, in a collaborative way. That's also the message that I take away from Kohei Iwaki-san on, let's sit down and see what those divergent perspectives mean, and how can we get into a more constructive dialogue to build a long-term solution on this. The second takeaway for me from this conversation is that whatever happens, it has to the new design or the review process has to conclude in something that can be fairly validated, can be fairly implemented, and is easy to uniformly enforce in the ecosystem. And last but not the least, and the most important one that I take away with me from this conversation is short-term measures remain important while the midterm measures are getting designed, because the efficiency of shipping operations, the element about building energy efficient ships is fully in the control of the industry, whereas something that relates to the cost of the transition or directly impacts the cost of the transition is not fully in control of the industry. So thank you for those insights and knowledge nuggets as part of this conversation to all of you in the panel. Thank you for finding the time. And thank you for the audience who found this session to be useful in one way or the other. We will get back to see if and how can we address the questions that we have not covered as part of this conversation today. And lastly, thank you for the support team and making it all happen. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.